Thank you, Jim. It's truly an honor to serve on the advisory board of the American Veterans Center. Today's panel discussion, recognizing the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, is a very important aspect of our goal and responsibilities here at the American Veterans Center. For today, we're truly honoring our heroes of the past while educating our future leaders of tomorrow. We welcome all of you here today, especially you young students and young service people in uniform. Without further ado, it's my honor to introduce today's panel. First, we have Colonel Edward Shames. Colonel Shames was born in Virginia in 1922. He joined the U.S. Army in 1942 at 20 and volunteered as a paratrooper. After training, he started his service with I Company, 3rd Battalion, 506th. He built the sand tables that were used by the airborne unit to train for the airdrop into Normandy. Sergeant Shames made his first jump into Normandy on D-Day as part of that famed Operation Overlord. And a week later, he became the first non-commissioned officer in his battalion to receive a battlefield commission in Normandy. He was transferred to command 3rd Platoon of Easy Company, later known as the famed Band of Brothers, which he led until the end of the war, including the Battle of the Bulge. At the Battle of the Bulge, he, along with another soldier, took out a German tank with a bazooka. In the HBO miniseries The Band of Brothers, he was played by the actor Joseph May. As the war was ending, he witnessed the evils of the concentration camps where the Germans imprisoned Europe's Jewish people. Colonel Shames was both a hero and a liberator. Emanuel Manny Mandel, sitting in the middle. Oh, on the end, at the seats. Manny was born in May of 1936, actually on Truman's birthday, he told me, in Latvia. Shortly after his birth, his father took a position. Pardon me. He was actually born on my father's birthday. We were just talking, so I have a connection there. And he was born in Budapest, where my grandmother was born. So I'm very, very pleased to be introducing him. Shortly after his birth, his father took a position of being one of 4 chief cantors in Budapest, Hungary. At that time, Budapest was one of the most important Jewish communities in all of Europe. As a 7-year-old boy in Hungary, Manny Mandel and his family were among a group of approximately 1,670 Jews that Adolf Eichmann, one of the major organizers of the Holocaust, offered to trade for Allied material. When the negotiations broke down, these Jews were diverted to Bergen-Belsen camp, the notorious concentration camp in Germany, where Anne Frank died. Manny's grandmother, who had lived with the family in Budapest, was killed at Auschwitz. At the beginning of World War II, there were over 600,000 Jewish citizens in Hungary. By the end of the war, more than 400,000 had been killed by the Nazis. In 1945, Manny and his mother immigrated by a British troop ship to Palestine. They came to the United States in 1949, where he has lived ever since. Now in the middle is Henry Greenbaum. Prior to 1939, the Jewish people had lived in Poland for over 1,000 years freely. When the Germans invaded Poland in 1939, Henry Greenbaum was just 11 years old. His father had just recently and unexpectedly died. After his father's death, Henry's mother and his siblings were moved into the crowded Jewish ghetto. In 1942, his mother and 2 sisters were deported, and all were killed at the Nazi death camp. A year later, Henry and his sister Faye were attempting to escape their labor concentration camp. However, when they were just a few feet from the hole in the fence, the Nazis opened fire, shooting Henry in the back of the head. After he dropped his sister's hand, he realized that she was dead. He survived. Most of Henry's family was killed by the Nazis during the war. Henry has survived both being shot while trying to escape, and he survived the 2-month death march when he was only 15 years old. You will hear from him what it was like in those early years of his life, and then what it was like the day he was liberated by the American Army on April 25th, 1945. Very honored to have such a distinguished panel here today. to discuss these very important issues that we deal with every day in our life as leaders of injustices and other issues that we have to deal with in working with other human beings, both at peace and at war. I'm going to start with Colonel Shames. Now, Colonel Shames is going to talk a little bit about when they rescued a large group of British troops. But I first want to ask, since this is the 70th anniversary of the end of the war, Colonel Shames, if you would like to come up, or you can either sit or come up, either way. But okay, I'd like to ask you if you could please tell us why you volunteered as a paratrooper and what it was like to have parachuted into Normandy on D-Day.
I'm pretty dumb, so I have to read. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. Just to let you know at the very beginning who I am, I think the gentleman said I'm Ed Shames of the original Band of Brothers, which means I was part of a military unit which won the war almost single-handed. So you listen to all this stuff that you heard today, forget it. We won the war. If you don't believe it, get the book. Maybe you've already read it and you know the fact. Incidentally, the author of the Band of Brothers, Dr. Stephen Ambrose, I'm sure he was born from a family of cattle farmers, something you probably didn't know. They must have raised bulls because he was the biggest bull shipper that has ever been known. And if you believe everything in that book, you'll believe anything. Seriously, out of the original infantry unit company that was featured in the book, there are 5 of us left. 3 of us are viable, 2 of us don't know where they are. They suddenly seem that I may be one of them. The entire regiment of 2,500 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment began training at the Corps with hand-picked 7,000 men, 7,000 bodies as an experimental unit infantry. We're the best trained units that's ever been in the history of the United States military. They weeded down from 7,000 to 2,500. They almost killed all of us doing it. The gentleman asked me why I joined the paratroopers. Originally, I was going to join the Canadian Air Force because the American Air Force would not take 3 of us that applied because we were too young at that time. Canadians sent out waivers and also newspaper articles saying that they wanted recruits up at Hamilton, Ontario for the Canadian Cadet Corps for fighter pilots, which we thought was pretty good. We went up, 3 of us went up. We passed the mental exams, we passed the physicals, and we were waiting to be sworn in on December the 8th, 1941. Very important date. We were in the hotel room Sunday afternoon waiting for Monday where we could be sworn in. And on the radio, we heard that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. So therefore, we had permission from the Canadian government to leave, go back home, and we waited to find out what was going to happen at home. That time, there was a group of civilians at Fort Monroe, Virginia, which was the headquarters of the United States Army at that time. The Pentagon was built, was not occupied. Some civilians, senior civilians at the general headquarters of the Army, decided they had to do something after the shellacking we took at Pearl Harbor, the Corregidor battalion, the battalion death march was 10,000 of our soldiers marched to prison camps when 1,000 were murdered by the Japs on the way to the prison. Something had to be done to boo up the American public. They decided that the American armies were no match for anyone. So they had to come up with a scheme. They decided on a super unit called the 506 Parachute Unit. We saw ads in the paper saying they were looking for top physically able men, smart, with an IQ of 110 or better, which would allow you to go to OCS, Officers Candidate School. And of course, we thought we were every bit of all of it. So we joined the 506, and that's how I got into the 506, sir.
Can you tell us what it was like to have parachuted on the first day of Normandy?
How it was, boy, that's...
Please just tell us what the experience was like.
The experience was we were scared as hell. It so happened that I was at that time a staff sergeant, operations sergeant of the battalion, and I was supposed to be sitting next to my commanding officer because he thought I was a pretty good soldier, and I knew just about what was going on. I was the one that briefed the battalion. Normally the battalion operations officer would brief. They asked me to brief it, and I did. Stayed in the tent for 24 hours a day, briefing anybody that would come along, one company at a time, one platoon at a time, one single at a time, if they decide to be briefed. I was told to do this by the commanding officer. And I was also told that when they were ready to emplane to jump into Normandy, that they would call for me and bring me to the plane with my stuff and get on next to the commanding officer. When I got to the plane, I was told by the crew chief that a correspondent was going to be in my seat on that number 1 plane of 47 for the battalion. He told me that the Jeep would take me over to the plane that I was going to go on, and of course at that time I was nervous as hell. Whoever said that they were cool and calm either were a damn fool or lying. We were getting ready to get our tail shot off, and we knew what was coming. So I went over to this plane that was designated for me. The jump master was a lieutenant. He said, "James, get in the back of the plane, and you're going to be a pusher, number 19. And we had arranged all the manifests on the plane for 17 and 18 because of the loading capacities of them. So when he said 19, that sort of got my curiosity, and I said, "Number 19, sir?" He said, "Yep." He said, "We're the only ones carrying 19. I have no idea which plane I was on. I could not prove that I jumped into Normandy. No one has ever found out a manifest had my name on it, so I don't know if I was in Normandy or not. But actually, I was. Got on the plane, got in the back of the plane, came across the coast, the English Channel. We got flak from Guernsey and Jersey Island, ineffective flak because it was too far away from our ships. We crossed over in Brittany, and all hell broke loose. It looked like I don't know if you remember or you've seen some of the fireworks displays at these theme parks. When they throw everything at the last minute, that was the end of the fireworks, if you recall it. They threw everything out. That's what it looked like when we crossed the coast. And of course, that diverted a lot of planes. A lot of weather created problems. Navigation created problems at that moment. and also a lot of cowardice. And I said cowardice. Some of the pilots got a little frightened and got the hell out of there, and we dropped as much as 50 miles away from where we were supposed to drop. It so happened that on my plane, when the red light came on, me stand up and get ready to jump, we counted off, tapped each other on the shoulder. It said, all right, let's go. The green light came on, and the man in front of me was carrying a 60 millimeter mortar, which was nothing unusual. Some of them carried 81 millimeter mortar base plates that weighed 45 pounds, but he had a 60 millimeter mortar that probably weighed 25 pounds, plus his weapon, plus about 1,400 other things that he was going to jump with, and he slipped on the way to the door. By the time I got him up, it must have been 5 or 6 seconds, so a plane going 110 miles an hour went a couple, 3 miles. When I jumped out, I jumped in a hailstorm of flak and tracers. You could hear the stuff coming through the parachute. And was I frightened? Oh, hell no, I was scared to death. I couldn't wait till I got down. It seemed like it was a half hour. I'm sure it was about 20 seconds by the time I jumped out to the ground.
Colonel, I want to thank you. I have to do some questions.
Okay,
Now,
okay,
I
okay.
have more questions for you,
Okay,
too.
okay.
But I want to get to some other questions.
Another time.
Well, he's got a lifetime of experiences, tell us. But I want to be able to ask the other panel some questions, and we have Admiral Howard's coming shortly as well, so which I know you're all looking forward to hearing from. Manny, I'd like to ask you next. What was your earliest memory of living in Hungary?
My earliest memory of living in Hungary is probably when I'm...
Oh,
It's green. Hello? 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 Are we okay? All right, we'll try again. My second earliest memory, since he asked for the first, is a fairly normal one. You need to remember that Hungary, excuse me, Hungary, unlike any other country in Europe, with one exception, had a relationship with Germany that was unique. Anybody recall what that was? Same as Italy. They were allies. As a consequence, Hungary was not occupied. Not until the 19th of March, 1944, which is very late in the war. Because of that, when I was 5 and 6 years old, or as I can remember things, I could tell you a piece of that history, which is in Yugoslavia, but the point is, in Hungary, life was, quote, normal. Yes, we wore a yellow star. There were restrictions, but not for a 7-year-old. I mean, I was not given the option of not taking this job or going to this school or doing this or that. Not for me. I was in a bubble of sorts. My parents protected me, and my early recollections are of a very normal life. I did not know what abnormal was at that time. I learned about it later.
Thank you. And
if you want my first experience with the Holocaust, I can give you that. It's a different story.
I was going to get to that. You mentioned wearing the yellow star, which all the Jewish people had to wear. You did have some experiences that weren't normal. You couldn't play in certain areas your father protected. You couldn't get a bicycle. You're afraid somebody would steal it. But your first real taste of what was that first experience like?
Well, that was not in Hungary. You had mentioned that my grandmother was killed in Auschwitz. That's my father's mother. So were my other two grandparents, my mother's parents, who lived in what was then the former Yugoslavia today, that was part of Hungary. Both of my parents are Hungarians, and my mother's from southern Hungary, Yugoslavia. My father is from eastern Hungary, which you know better as the land that gave us Dracula. This is Transylvania. In the winter of 1941, my mother and father and I went south to the city where she was raised in, where my grandparents lived, for a winter vacation of about a week. Let me tell you briefly and quickly the experience, which was then my first experience with these things. I didn't know what it was about, but I was there and I can recall it very clearly. I then learned later what it was. So this is the experience. We're staying at my mother's sister's, my aunt's house. Somebody comes up early in the morning, the second or third day, and says, there's something going on in the street. No idea what it is. 5 minutes later, 2 policemen come up, knock on the door. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to come outside. Please dress warmly. This is winter time. It's not bitter, but it's winter. Please dress warmly. We need to have a census. Now, we know that we have a census here every 10 years. The Nazis, whether they're Hungarian Nazis or German Nazis or Yugoslavian Nazis, had a census every 15 minutes. I exaggerate, of course. But they felt that if they knew precisely where everybody was at all times, they could control that population. We came out of the apartment, were told to turn left and march in that direction. And we marched for some time, an easy march. My mother carried me, my father's carried me. I was 5.5 years old. And I walked until we arrived at a place which I recognized. It was a stockade fence, 8 feet tall on my left. In European cities, any of you have served in Europe might know this, that are not on the lake or the ocean, they make beaches out of the rivers. And on the other side of this fence, on the left side, maybe for 300 yards or so, in the summertime, there were wave pools and hot pools and cold pools and restaurants, amusement parks. Lovely place. And I remembered it from the previous summer. Now, of course, in the wintertime, the Danube is frozen, and the place is kind of abandoned. It's locked down for the winter. We noticed as we're walking along the stockade fence on our left, 100 yards or so down the road, the gates of this place are open. And people are told to go through and then turn left towards the river. And we keep ambling along rather slowly. We get a little closer to this place, and there's a policeman standing on the right side and says to my father, says, "Mister, what are you doing here?" Father says to him, "I'm here with my family." He says, "That's not the point. I don't care about that. But if we count you and your group in the census, it'll mess up the numbers because you're not from here. You're from Budapest." This is 3 hours south of Budapest. How does he know it? He says he's a police officer who has a beat a block from our apartment in Budapest and recognizes my father from the street. My father went to an office, went here, went there. He says, "Stand aside." It saved our lives. Within minutes of the stand aside issue, a staff car comes down the road. The guy comes out in uniform, has a powwow with the rest of his buddies, and announces to the bullhorn that the requirements of the census have been met. Please go home. We have no idea why we're here, and we have no idea why we were told to go home, but we did. I can tell you without going too far into the future, the next morning at 6 o'clock, my father ordered a cab, we got on the train, back to Budapest. Because somehow when there is a catastrophe, you want to go home, wherever home is. Now the question is, what happened at the beach? Those people who walked down the road, turned left into the gates, and went to the Danube, which had ice about this thick, had been blasted open that morning by cannon fire. They were shot into the Danube, never to be seen again, and to be found in March, if they survived the water in a sense, as bodies floating, or never found again. 350 people were so killed. This was a description that this little child remembers as a pogrom, P-O-G-R-O-M, a pogrom which has no purpose, no reason, no use, demonstrates nothing. It is just something that they can do to you because they can, and they did.
Thank you, sir. Did you meet Anne Frank?
I wish I had. Anne Frank, as you recall, was in hiding in Amsterdam, discovered, sent to Auschwitz, and from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was not a killing camp. It was a concentration camp, but lots and lots of folks died there from a disease that is not, if anybody here is in the medical business, think about, have you ever heard of typhus? Yes, third-year medical school on Tuesday for one slide. That's all you know about it. But it was a rampant thing that is curable now with antibiotics. In those days, the antibiotics had just been discovered, and they certainly didn't go first to the concentration camps. Anne Frank was brought then to Bergen-Belsen in August of 1944. I was deported to Bergen-Belsen in July of 44. I was traded out of Bergen-Belsen through what Barry talked about a little while ago in December of 44. She stayed there until April, and died 3 weeks before the liberation of the camp. In a sense, what we did is the two of us never knew each other, of course. Besides, she was too old for me. She was about 16, I was about 9. But we breathed the same air for about 4 months. I feel a certain kind of a kinship. No, I never met her.
That's before the term cougar. But I'm going to come back to some other questions for you and Colonel Shames, but I want to ask a question now of Henry. Can you tell the people here today what your experience was in the Jewish ghetto?
I didn't hear what you said. Something about
Can you
the
tell
ghetto?
us about being in
In
the
the
Jewish
ghetto?
ghetto?
Well, in the ghetto, the only good thing, the whole family was together, intact. We all had jobs, some of us, in the munition factory, and we went to work before the Nazis invaded our town. We had rumors that that's what they like. And we had a tailor shop, and my father was still alive, and we happened to have one of our customers, happened to be a manager in the munition factory. And my father asked him to give his kids a job there. No hesitation. He said, "How many do you have?" He said, "The 3 single girls and this young boy." And he gave us jobs, and we had IDs. We were able to leave the ghetto area only to go to work and come back because we were guarded there. We didn't have any 6-foot fences. They took like 3-block perimeter, small little blocks, and we were living in our homes. And then some of them didn't live in that area, so they brought all the 6,000 Jews in this 3-block perimeter, and we had to sleep together. And we had a family of 9 ourselves, 6 girls and 3 boys, and the married sisters. After that, they got them into the ghetto, which was normal. But the only thing is, we were dirty, we were filthy, we ran out of food, we ran out of soap, and we had to strictly wait on the German army to bring our rations in. And the rations would get meager, smaller and smaller every time. The women were, supposedly some of them were able to bribe the Ukrainian soldiers who they joined the Nazi regime. They gave him a little watch or a necklace. He would bring him in bread. You couldn't bribe the Nazis. You couldn't even approach them. But the Ukrainians you could. And they did that for a while. But then they kept changing the guards. Like every 2 weeks, a new one came in. And people ran out of what to bargain away anymore. They didn't have anything left. And we stayed in that ghetto from October 42 to 1940 to October 42. Intact, the whole family together. And then they decided too many people to feed. So they had what they call a selection. They brought in extra soldiers, extra dogs. They chased us out of the ghetto. No one could go to work for 24 hours. And we were all in the same area, and they brought in the dogs and the soldiers. They chased us out of there into a more open field where the farmers would bring goodies in every Thursday or Friday. So it was an open place, and there was a desk standing there, and the army, the German Nazis were there. And as you walked up with the family, we showed them the ID cards, to one side. And if you didn't have the ID, you were strong enough, you were not attached with any children, you're on the same side. At the end, we were all separated. They took away the young, very young, and married mothers with children, grandmothers, and they took them away from us with no soul. That was the worst time of my life at 12 years old, and all of a sudden they take my mom away. I was the baby out of the 9 that we had, and my mom was trying to go over, just to run over, give me a little hug. They stayed with the rifle butts, and they pushed her back. She said, "You cannot come back here." She was designated to go on the other side with all the older people. So my mom just yelled over to my 3 sisters, "Take care of your little brother." And that's the end of that. I never saw them again. But I was left with 3 sisters because we were working in the munition factory. And we stayed there. Then on the way after the selection, they didn't let us go back into the ghetto. They built for us a slave labor camp on the top of a stone quarry in our city, 6 kilometers away from the ghetto area, and they literally chased you, and then with whips, and the dogs would grab you if you didn't jog. You couldn't just jog, normal marching. You had to jog. And we finally reached our destination, 6 kilometers on top of the stone quarry. There was a camp with towers and dogs and the guards, 6-foot fences. One fence was a wooden fence, the outside fence, and then the inside fence was barbed wire, not electric. And we stayed there for 1 more year.
Now, back to our panel. Colonel Shames had to leave. One of the questions I want to ask him, and I'll just mention, I know the answer, was we're on the topic of the Holocaust, and he was on the raid when Hitler's home was invaded, and he stole some whiskey from there, which some of the other people did, and he actually served that bottle that he stole at his son's bar mitzvah. And there's a lot of, that was like when Jesse Owens went back to Berlin many years later, and they said, how does it feel to be back here after the way you were treated in '36 by Hitler? He said, I'm here, Hitler isn't. So I'd like to ask a few more questions if we could. We have some more time. And we talked briefly, Manny talked about wearing the yellow star. I wanted to ask you, Henry, what that was like. You were a little bit older at that time, and I wanted to know what it felt like to you being different, singled out wearing a yellow Star of David. Yes.
Oh, me. When they
Speak
put
into
the
a mic.
when they put the Star of David on.
Yes, what it was like.
Well, we were all singled out from the whole city population. Just the Jews had to wear the yellow Star of David. And then that means once the truck would pull up and grab you on there for a day's work, digging trenches, they would always get you the one with the Jewish star on, if you're old enough. But if you're an old man, that didn't bother you. Or if you were a child, that didn't bother you yet. But we were digging trenches for them after that, and we were all singled out. I went to school, public school, and the teachers sent me home. They said, no school for Jewish children after they put the Star of David on.
I was going to ask you how you were educated. How were the young students educated, both in your native language and history and math, as well as in religious training? Was that done by the families? How, if you weren't allowed to be trained?
I didn't have any education. I was like too young. That was maybe the 6th grade. And I don't know about 6th grade in Europe if we were that smart, But I would say they deprived me of my education.
And Manny, you were able to be educated because it was normalized at that stage when you were in Hungary?
Yes, I was on my own. Yeah, but I was, but rather peculiarly. I started school in Hungary in Hungarian. My 2nd grade was in Bergen-Belsen in Hungarian. My 3rd was in Switzerland in Hungarian. My 4th was in Hebrew in Israel and Palestine. So I was educated, yes, but I'm not sure it was particularly well-rounded or particularly stable. I know that later on, when I came to this country in the 7th grade, and later on in high school, I had some catching up to do. I mean, I didn't have all the grounding in arithmetic. I did not have the grounding in other kind of things that people here have in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. I did catch up, but the education was there. I'm not sure that all of the glue stuck.
Now, your father was one of the 4 chief cantors, and he was at the Rambach Synagogue. He was at the Rambach Synagogue in Budapest. Did that synagogue survive the war, and did you ever go back to visit?
Yes and yes. The 2 major synagogues in Budapest, one, if anybody's been there, is still there and has been recently refurbished. It's the Tabak Temple. Tabak means tobacco in German, and Dohány means tobacco in Hungarian. It is on that street, on Dohány Street. The Hungarian culture was very much Austrian and German connected, so it was not unusual to call streets and whatnot by both names. It's the 2nd largest synagogue in the world. It has been recently refurbished in the last 10 years or so because some of it was built on pilings. And some of the pilings were in some way damaged or shaken up or whatever when they put a new subway line in after the war. The organization that did all the fundraising for the refurbishing it was the Emanuel Foundation, which means nothing to you and it's not my name. But you would know that the Emanuel Foundation was after Emanuel Schwartz, whose son, Tony Curtis. Bernie Schwartz, Tony Curtis, if you even know who that is. The young folks don't even know Tony Curtis, let alone Bernie Schwartz.
Some like it hot.
That's one of them. Anyhow, that was the foundation that was involved in making that happen. The Rombach Temple did survive the war. Its dome was heavily damaged. It was rebuilt and used for about a year or two after the war and then abandoned. And for the last 50, 60 years, they've been debating what should they do with it.
We're talking about terminology. Does anyone know where the term ghetto comes from? In Italy, in Italian, a ghetto is where the forgery was, where they had the melting of the metals and forged them into, back in when the Jews were stuck in that particular part of Venice, and that's where the term ghetto comes from. So when you hear it, you'll know that's where goes back to the 1400s. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up to questions, but I just want to, I think it'd be interesting, since your families were lost in Europe, to tell everybody. I'll start with you, Henry, and then to Manny. Tell us about the families that you have had when you got here, and your lives were spared, and what you have contributed by Family Way to the United States.
Well, wouldn't you be interested how I got liberated by the American Army?
I'm sure, yes. Well,
I think that would be interesting.
That was the question I said in the beginning.
They're my favorite guys. I speak to them all the time.
That was April the 25th, 1945.
That's right. And we were on a farm. We were marching almost 2 months, about 5, 6 weeks, I think. And the group would get less and less because they died out. They couldn't keep up with the march. And they didn't feed us anything. The soldiers didn't have any food either. And the dogs didn't have any food. But when they were hungry, they located a farm. The farmer was German. They were German. They had themselves a good 10-course dinner. We were allowed 1 raw potato and some water to drink. You were so hungry, you could eat 5, 6, and you would still be hungry. I mean, 5 years hungry. And then that's the only potato we got on the march. We were eating leaves that dropped off the bushes, brown leaves, and chew them up and drink water out of the creek if it wasn't frozen. Unless we went on a farm, we had that 1 potato and what's this? We did that march till the 24th of April, 1945. Or we came to a farm. They put us into the farm. They ran into the farm. And first thing they did is put us into the silo where they keep the hay. And we found sheep in there and also goats. It was kind of warm. From the April showers, we were drenched. We were just water dripping off of us. All we had was that striped pajama on, that's all. And the shoes, wooden clogs, no socks, no underwear, everything was wet. We got in there, and they put the dogs outside. And you don't need a guard with those dogs. When you touch the door, the dogs were on their feet, ready to attack you. But they were eating, the dogs would guard us. And we were in there, they gave us 1 raw potato and some water to drink. Next morning on the 25th, they woke us up early, and we only marched a very short time. And all of a sudden, we sit in a circle near a wooded area. We saw low-flying planes. We didn't know who the planes were. We thought it were Germans. We didn't know that. But the guards that were guarding us, they knew there was the American Air Force, and maybe a half a mile on the highway, you could see it with the eyes, as the regular army come through. And the army that freed me was General Patton's 3rd or 11th Armed Division. Anyway, what happened is we were sitting in a circle, and all of a sudden, the 2 guards that were watching us, they disappeared. They ran away from us. And we couldn't understand why did they leave us by ourselves. Normally, they would shoot you first, and don't leave evidence, and then they go. But this time, they let us alive, and we were sitting in a circle, and we didn't like that because I dare them leaving us. Anybody can come and kill us now. And we're sitting and waiting with no guards on there. A tank took off from the main highway towards us. We thought still it was a German tank. We didn't know it was an American tank. 5 feet away, the American tank stopped, and the soldier out of the hatch, very tight squeeze. He came out, blonde hair, his little crew cut with little curls on there, and he reached over and he put his hands on their mouth and he said, "We are Americans, and all of you are free." Being locked up under that conditions, miserable, I mean unbearable almost, especially on the march, that we didn't get any that little slice of bread. And then all of a sudden someone tells you, "You are free." I said, "Dear Lord, thank you for saving our lives and sending that beautiful soldier with the tank over to liberate us. But why did it take you so long?" 5 years it took for the safety, and I got my freedom back. And I want to respect all you soldiers and the veterans for giving, they risked their lives to save our lives, and they gave us our freedom back. And freedom we need to cherish. Here in America, I learned people take freedom for granted. But all of you in uniform, I spoke to them. I was all over every military base that I was designated to go from the Holocaust Museum. I was at Annapolis about 5 years ago. In the evening, we talked there to the Navy. I was on a USS Truman on the boat, speaking to the sailors. And I was in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, at least 3 times. I met General Petraeus there. When we came from the museum, and to hand General Petraeus a plaque from the museum. General Petraeus was already fighting the war in Iraq. So graciously, the wife took care of it. She accepted the plaque from the Holocaust Museum, and they entertained us. But I'm about 3 times there talking to the soldiers and the children, high school and middle school on the base. So
It's very important this story be told, and both Manny and Henry do a lot of telling of this story at the Holocaust Museum and at schools. They educate, and we're just honored that they came here today to tell all you new leaders and veterans of the importance of this story. I really want to open up to questions because this is such an important thing, but I briefly just tell us how many children you have and your family here.
what?
Your family, did you have families here?
We were 9 children home.
No, here in America.
Oh, here in America, I had a sister who immigrated in 1937. But when I was liberated, I didn't know where she was. The soldiers were very kind to us. They would give you the shirt off their back. And sometimes we didn't want anything from them because we were full of lice at liberation. I mean, we didn't want that. But then I located a brother who was in the Polish army fighting the Nazis. He was in Wilno, Lithuania, made it back to Poland, to Lodz, Poland. And I was liberated near Frankfurt am Main, Germany. And I wound up in a displaced person camp. And then my brother came, and he said, I said, "Where do I have a sister in America?" He said, "She's in the Washington area." So I said, oh, he's closer than I said in America, but the soldiers couldn't help me. They tried to help me. Well, once we told them the Washington area, we got a lot of help. And also what saved us, she married a first cousin, and she maintained the name. But there was a difference in spelling. We spelled our name Grynbaum, and my sister and her husband spelled their name Gree. It was kind of close. And we were investing in the UNRWA, the HIAS, in that camp that we were. You know, I call it a camp. That was an open thing. And they located my sister. They located her, and she sent papers for us. She said, "Those are my 2 brothers," because my brother came from Lodz, Poland to Germany, and the 2 of us. And they located her. She sent papers. Within a year, we came to New York. We wound up in New York. And then who came to pick us up was not my sister. I had a brother, an older brother, who escaped with a Polish soldier. And he asked the Polish soldier, there was a friend. They knew each other somehow. And he had a lot of medals on him. And the Polish soldier was running away from the German army on the different direction. And my brother left me by myself with my mom and the 3 sisters on the farm. And he disappeared. And I didn't see where he was running. He didn't want me to run with him. I was too young. But the Polish soldiers started yelling at me, "You too young, you go back to your mother." So I said, okay, and I went back to my mom. In the meantime, he wound up in Vilnius, Lithuania. I don't know if you are aware of, in Vilnius, Lithuania, they had a Japanese ambassador who was helping the ultra Hasidic Jews with false passports. And my brother answered that criteria. And he got out of Vilnius, Lithuania, and they sent him to Manchuria. And from Manchuria, my sister took over, and she brought him down to America in 1941. He is the one that came pick the two brothers up in New York.
Thank you. Would you like to, then we'll open to questions.
Quick comments. Henry and I are separated by a number of things, including about a half a dozen years, and also by the fact that timing is everything. Henry gets involved in a war of his own in the 30s. I told you earlier, I was a Hungarian ally of Germany. Come specifically, the war comes in 41. Holocaust doesn't come till 44. It's part of the trade. This late in the war, the German after 20 years, he was able to make. Because she had left Europe. In the whole table. He was not doing very well. My aunt comes to this country, marries, has a family. My father came to visit her after the war as one of the remaining members of the family. We came in 49. The family consisted of my mother, my father, and I had no brothers and sisters. I could talk about this. Conscious decision was one in 36. It was not the time to bring a child into this world. And I can only substantiate by saying it to you. My mother comes from one of 6 adults, 3 women and 3 men, who all grew up. They produced 5 children of those. Became an only child and remained that way for the rest of my life. Here, I'm married for more years than I care to remember. 57 years is a long time, folks. I have 1 wife, 2 children, and 3 grandchildren, the youngest of whom is now a freshman at GW.
Congratulations. Joe.
Yes? Well, in my specific story, there's the man involved with Adolf Eichmann, I mentioned his name, is a man by the name of Kastner, K-A-S-Z-T-N-E-R, a Hungarian Jewish lawyer. A book is written about that situation called The Kastner Train by a Canadian author named Anne Porter. Anne Porter, A-N-N-E Porter, The Kastner Train. There's another one by one Ladislaus Loeb, who was in fact part of my group. But look up Kastner, K-A-S-Z-T-N-E-R, and you'll get lots of information about my particular story.
Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for questions. I was just advised we're running behind schedule, which when you have great panels is unfortunate. But I want to take this opportunity to thank our panel today and say how important it is for the soldiers who witnessed the atrocities and for the survivors who lived through it and did survive to be able to speak to such a group of young leaders today in order to remind us of the constant need to be vigilant citizens and to stop injustice, prejudice, and hatred wherever that may be throughout the world. And that's one of our jobs as soldiers and sailors, to be vigilant. I want to say one final word in Yiddish to these 2 gentlemen, Gesei gesund, which means please go in good health.
Thank you. Thank you very much.